So guys, we're going to deal with chapter 4 today, managerial accounting, process costing. Now, in the previous 2 weeks, we talked about job order costing, and that job order costing is used when there's a lot of different products and you want to keep track of those products separately. This is a totally different process called, instead of job order costing, process costing. Both systems between job and process assign material, labor, and overhead costs to the products. And they provide a mechanism for computing unit product costs. Both systems use the same manufacturing accounts: manufacturing overhead, raw materials, work in process, and finished goods. And we flow the costs similarly. But the difference is in process costing, a single product is produced either on a continual basis or for long periods of time. And the unit of products are pretty much identical. Costs get accumulated by department, and unit costs are computed by department. So we're dealing with oil, milk, shampoo, items that have a lot of volume, identical processes. Process costing is used for products that are similar and produced continuously. The processing departments, any unit in an entity where there are materials, labor, or overhead that get added to the product. These activities performed in a processing department get performed the same, uniformly the same on all units of production. The output has to be homogeneous. Products in a process costing environment typically flow in a sequence from one department to another department. So we are going to start and record the flow of materials, of labor and overhead through a processing system. It's the same effect that we take our direct materials. Okay, they're saying they can't join in. So I'm a little confused. Did you guys have a problem joining? Rachel, are you in here now? Kelsey and Rachel, it looks like you're in here.
Yeah, I just got it to work.
Okay, Rachel, it won't let me join, but you are joined. Gloria,
Yeah.
you're in here? Gloria, okay, so it looks like y'all are cool. Okay, sorry, I was just looking at my phone. And so this process is the same as job order. We take these 3 elements, put them into work in process until we have a finished good, and they stay in the asset, current asset, finished goods, until it is then sold. Okay. Now, in return regarding overhead costs, let me just make sure I'm not screwing something up. So we're clear on that. Now, job order costing trace the various costs to specific jobs, and then they go, once they're completed, into finished goods until they're sold. But in a processing system, we take those goods, instead of putting them into a job, we put them into a department. the costs are traced and applied to departments in this process cost system. Because some products will continue on to other processing departments, and some will stop after a certain processing department. For purposes of this example we're going to use, assume there are two processing departments, Department A and Department B. So materials go into Department A, materials go into Department B. As in job order costing, materials get drawn from the storeroom using a materials requisition form, and they can be added to any department. Here's how we would show the journal entry to add them into one department, two departments, or many. You just put into the work in process which department it's going into, and we credit our raw materials. The labor, the same way. We show a credit to our payable and we debit it to our work in process for whichever department we're working on. In process costing, labor costs are traced to departments, not specific jobs. The following journal entry records the labor costs that are being recorded into two different departments, A and B. Now, when we deal with manufacturing overhead, they also will get applied to different departments. Instead of jobs, they get applied to the various departments. Same kind of journal entry, just like we did in job costing, we put them in, but we put them, instead of jobs, we put them into departments. In processing, predetermined overhead rates are usually used. Manufacturing overhead cost is applied according to the amount of the allocation base that is incurred in the department. The following journal entries record the overhead costs applied to Department A and Department B. Now, if Department A starts first, and they start with processing in Department A, and then they move, the goods move then, or the flow moves to Department B, the transferred in cost from Department A are added to the manufacturing costs that occur in Department B. So once the work is completed in Department A, it will get transferred into Department B. So as you see, once what needs to happen in A is finished, it just all moves into the next department. In this case, we only have two departments, A and B. Once Department B is done, then it's done with work in process. In this scenario, it goes right into finished goods. Okay. After the processing is finished in Department B, it's done, it's ready to be sold. It just gets debited into finished goods. Once it's sold, we credit our finished goods and we debit our cost of goods sold. So someone says, it's saying, please wait for the host to start the meeting. Can someone respond to you guys all see the text? She must be in the wrong class. Okay, it's the same one. Vang. Oh. Anyway, so once it is completed, taken out of finished goods, it goes into cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold goes on the income statement. Finished goods is on the balance sheet as a current asset. It's been sold. We credit our inventory, finished goods, we debit our cost of goods sold on the income statement. So in process costing, each department needs to calculate two numbers for financial reporting: the cost of its ending work in process inventory and the cost of its completed units that were transferred to the next stage of the production process. The key to deriving these two numbers is going to be calculating unit costs within each department. So there's two ways of doing this. We can take the weighted average method and the FIFO method. The weighted average method calculates unit costs by combining the costs and outputs from the current and prior periods. If we go the FIFO route, we'll calculate the unit cost based solely on the costs and outputs from just the current period, not the previous period. If we use the weighted average method, it doesn't distinguish between the current period and the work done in a prior period. It blends them all together. The equivalent unit of production per department, or the number of units transferred to the next department, plus the equivalent units in the department's ending work in process. All this is hubush until we do problems. Hubush, what's the word I want to use? Minutia? Confusing? All of it's crazy until we do a problem. Now, the next concept we're dealing with here in process costing are what we call conversion costs. Direct labor costs are usually small when we're dealing with process costing systems. Direct labor and manufacturing overhead in process costing are usually combined into one classification of product costs that we call conversion costs. So we take our direct labor and our manufacturing overhead and we add the two together and we call them a conversion cost. The example combines these costs. Okay. Equivalent units are defined as the product of the number of partially completed units and the amount of percentage completion on those units. We need to calculate these because they're gonna have partially completed units, not only in the ending inventory, but the beginning inventory. Makes it a little more difficult to figure out the output because of these partially completed units. So when we figure out equivalent units, it's going to be the number of partially completed units and the percentage completion of those units with respect to the processing in the department. So here's a good example. Department A has 500 units in its ending work in process inventory that are 60% complete with respect to processing in the department. These 500 partially completed units are equivalent to 300 fully completed units. So if they have been completed 60%, we take those 500, multiply it times the percent completed to come up with what we call equivalent units. So in this respect, Department A's ending work in process, we would say contain 300 equivalent units for the period. For the current period, Jones started 15,000 units and completed 10, leaving 5,000 units in process, 30% complete. How many equivalent units of production did Jones have for the period? What do y'all think? B? Who said B? Right, excellent. The 10,000 completed units plus those 5,000 units at 30%, 1,500 units there would give us 11,500. Now, you know me, problem after problem. Chocolatier SA is located in a French-speaking canton in Switzerland. The company makes chocolate truffles that are sold in popular embossed tins. The company has two processing departments, cooking and molding. In the cooking department, the raw ingredients for the truffles are mixed and then cooked in special candy making vats. In the molding department, the melted chocolate and other ingredients from the cooking department are poured carefully into molds and decorative flourishes are applied by hand. After cooling, the truffles are packed for sale. The company uses a process costing system. The T accounts on the next slide show the flow of costs through the two departments in April. So the cooking department, it started April with $8,000 in dollars. It added materials of 42,000, labor of 50, and overhead of 75. Then during the month of April, 160,000 was transferred out. So you see the work in process, it still has items in that work in the Department A. We only transferred out 160, so it's got about 15,000 left in there. Then the molding department began the month with 4,000. It transferred into that department from the cooking department 160,000. It added its own direct labor and overhead, and it transferred out 240,000. And it has left in it 205, 240. It's got about 5,000 left in it, doesn't it, roughly? So our job is to prepare the journal entries to show the flow of costs through these departments in April. So we're going to show a debit to cooking, credit to raw materials inventory. Let me just debit to raw materials. Okay, so this came in from the materials, the labor, and the overhead. So we credited the direct materials and we debited the work in process cooking. We did the same thing with salaries and with manufacturing overhead. So if you look back here, sorry, our labor was 50 here. Our labor here was 36,000. Sorry. And so we're just showing that work in process cooking, work in process molding, we credit our salaries and wages payable. Yes.
So I have a question. Would you be able to go back one slide? So is that because it was transferred in and then the direct labor was applied? Why would we add the 50,000 plus the 36,000 together?
We're not really adding them together.
Or like it would be like considered like the same date that it would be.
Because these are going on simultaneously.
Oh,
Okay. So it's not like cooking's waiting to happen and then they are sitting around twiddling their thumbs. They're all happening simultaneously. Does that make sense? Okay. So we're going to show our labor in the two departments. We're going to show our manufacturing overhead in the two departments. Then we'll also show the transfer from the cooking department to the molding department. And then we'll show the transfer from the molding department to finished goods. The one thing to note here, no direct materials got brought into the molding department. Just the direct labor and the manufacturing overhead. Okay, with this problem. Now, we are going to compute the equivalent units of production using the weighted average method, which takes both periods into account, the previous period and the current period. Smith Company reported the following activities in the assembly department for the month of June. We started with 300 units where the materials were 40% complete and the conversion, which is manufacturing and labor, were 20% complete. We added 6,000 units during the production and we transferred out 5,400 units in June. So we're sitting at the end of June with 900 units, 60% complete for materials, and the conversion, which is manufacturing and labor, 30% complete. So how do we figure out equivalent units? Units completed and transferred out of the department was 5,400. See right here, 5,400. Okay, so they were 100% complete in terms of material and conversion. The work in process at the end of June, 900 units were 60% complete in regards to materials and only 30% complete in terms of conversion. So we literally show what was transferred out, and then at the end of the period, what was the work in process. This then gives us what we call the equivalent units of production in the department during June. What was transferred out plus our ending inventory gives us everything that happened in that department. The equivalent units of production will always equal the units completed and transferred plus what's remaining in work in process. It makes sense, doesn't it? You either got rid of it or you still got it. Then compute the equivalent units of production. If we started 6,000 units, which is the 5,100 plus this 900 units that kind of were in different levels of completion. And then we completed 5,940 equivalent units. See, 6,000 units are started. The 5,940 were manufactured during the period. For conversion purposes, we started again 6,000. We completed the 5,400 units in full. And for conversion purposes, we only had 30% of the conversion process completed. So the number of units times 30% gives us our 270 equivalent units, the 5,670 in regards to the conversion. So let's look at another problem. Highland's company uses the weighted average method in its process costing. It processes wood pulp for various manufacturers of paper products. Data relating to tons of pulp processed during June are provided below. So at the beginning of the month, it had 20,000 tons. It was 90% completed in regards to material, 80% completed in regards to labor and overhead. At the end of the period, it shows 30,000 were still in work in process, with 60% completed with materials, 40% completed with labor and overhead. And we started into production during June 190,000 units. Two things we have to do here. We'll compute the number of tons of pulp completed and transferred out during June. And then we'll figure out the equivalent units of production for the materials and for labor and overhead for June. Okay, just like the problem ahead before. So what are we going to do? We start June work in process with 20,000 units. Let's just confirm that. See, we started it with 20. We added 190. So we have 210 that is in process, with our work in process at the end of the month at 30. So we know what was completed and transferred out during the month was 180. Okay. Beginning inventory plus brought in equals total minus ending inventory is what we completed. Now, equivalent units of production. The ending work in process inventory had 30,000 tons at 60% complete, which is 18,000 tons. So our equivalent units of production for materials is 198,000 tons. For the labor and overhead, it was completed at 40%. So the 30,000 tons at 40% completion gives us 12. Sorry, our equivalent units of production for the labor and overhead portion is 192. Does that make sense, guys? Now, computing the cost per equivalent unit using the weighted average method. If we start with 300 units and we see that our materials at 40% complete would be $6,119. Our conversion, direct labor and manufacturing overhead, is 20% complete. We started production of 6,000 units. We ended with 5,400 units. And during the month, we added material cost of $118,621 and conversion cost of $81,130. Then we see we have 900 units in ending inventory. Materials complete of 60%, conversion 30% complete. It's given us all of our facts here. How do we compute the cost per equivalent unit? We're going to start with our cost of beginning work in process inventory, add what we had during the period, and divide that by our equivalent units of production. So, starting the month, we had $10,039 in costs for the materials and the conversion. We added to that the $199,751, the materials and the conversion. So our total cost during the period is $209,790, showing the amount that was materials and the amount that was conversion. Now these equivalent units, 5940 and 5670, seeing where they came from. Oh, they'll tell us here. Came from, these were the equivalent units that were manufactured or in process during the period. We take the totals here, we divide it by our equivalent units, we get 21 bucks. Here, we came up our equivalent units in like a learning objective right before this one that came up with the 5670. We take our conversion cost, divide that by our equivalent units to come up with our cost per equivalent unit. Combined, the cost is 36 bucks. With our materials plus our conversion, we've got 36 bucks here. Superior Micro Products uses the weighted average method in its process costing system. Data for the assembly department for May appears below. So we've got our work in process, we've got our cost added, and our equivalent units of production. Compute the cost per equivalent unit for material, labor, overhead, and in total. Let me give you just a couple minutes. Try to look at this, okay? Just try to look and see if it makes sense to you. I'm going to just give you like 60 seconds here. Okay, so we show our materials our labor, our overhead. This is what started at the beginning of the period here. This is what got added during the period. Here's our totals. It gave us our equivalent units for materials. It gave us the equivalent units for conversion. We can take the total cost, divide that by our equivalent units of production to come up with our cost. So the total cost per equivalent unit here is $22.94. Now we're going to assign cost to units using the weighted average cost. We've got our equivalent units. We take our cost per equivalent unit to come up with our cost of ending work in process. Then those that get transferred out, we've got the same cost there. So we know exactly what's still sitting in work in process and the cost amount that was transferred out. So here is the prep department. It's the first department in this company for whatever they're processing. It tells us the equivalent units in ending work in process inventory, 2,000 for material, 2,000 units for material, 800 for conversion. It gives us our cost per equivalent unit, $13.86 and $4.43. A total of 20,100 units were completed and transferred to the next processing department during the period. Compute the cost of ending work in process inventory for materials, conversion, and in total. Then we'll compute the cost of the units completed and transferred out. So we've got here what we started with. Materials, 2,000, conversion, 800 units. We have the cost per unit to give us the cost of ending work in process. Then we completed and transferred out 20,100 units to the next department. We take our cost per unit, equivalent unit, $13.86 here, $4.43 here, the $278, $586, and the $89,043 get transferred out. Those costs get transferred on to the next department. Now, the next step is to prepare a cost reconciliation report. Costs to be accounted for. Cost of beginning WIP, $10,039. The cost that we added to production, the $199,751. So we have total cost of $209,790. This is how we know what happened to them. We know our ending work in process was the $15,390. And the costs that were transferred out was $194,400. So it all balances. We can account for where all of our costs are. When we talk about operation costing, it's kind of a mixture. It's kind of a little bit of a combination of job order and process costing because it's got both attributes. It's used more when there are batches of many different products that pass through the same processing department. So Maria Am Corporation uses the weighted average method in its process costing system. The baking department is one of the processing departments in its strudel manufacturing facility. In June, in the baking department, the cost of beginning work in process inventory was $35.70. The cost of the ending work in process inventory was $28.60. And the cost added to production was $43,120. So you can figure out the reconciliation by taking the beginning WIP, add what was added to production to show the costs that need to be accounted for. Well, they were accounted for by showing what was left in ending inventory and what was transferred out during the period. So you see, let me see, exercise costs for vacancy. The cost of units completed and transferred out, you can take all the costs added to production, you come up with the total, then you know what your ending work in process is. So that's how you can find out what was transferred out. It pretty much is straightforward there. Y'all need a break? It's kind of, I don't want to say it's boring, it's technical, okay? Scribner's Corporation produces fine papers in 3 production departments: pulping, drying, and finishing. In the pulping department, raw materials such as wood fiber and rag cotton are mechanically and chemically treated to separate their fibers. The result is a thick slurry of fibers. In the drying department, those wet fibers transferred from the pulping department are laid down on porous webs, pressed to remove excess liquid, and dried in ovens. Then in the finishing department, the dried paper is coated, cut, and spooled onto reels. Sorry, guys. Okay, the company uses the weighted average method in its process costing system. Data for March for the drying department follow. The work in process inventory for March 1st, the pulping is 100%, the conversion is only 20%. For the end of the period, the units are 80,000. Pulping is 100%, conversion is 25%. Okay. Then it tells us our pulping costs started at 4,800. Our conversion costs were 500. We transfer units transferred in is 157,000. We added 102,000 in pulping costs and in conversion costs. Excuse me, guys. Okay. the units transferred to the next department were 157,000 units. And then adding pulping costs, 102,450, and conversion cost of 31,300. So that's the information we need. No materials are added in the drying department. Pulping cost represents the cost of the wet fibers transferred in from the pulping department. Wet fibers processed in the drying department in batches. Each unit in the above table is a batch, and one batch of wet fibers produces a set amount of dried paper that's passed on to the finishing department. You just don't realize what's involved with when we buy products. Compute the drying department. This is what, sorry guys. Compute the drying department's equivalent units of production for pulping and conversion in March. Okay, let's just do that one first. The pulping transferred to the next department, 157, and the conversion, 157. At the end of the period, the pulping had 8,000 units, 100% complete. The conversion had 8,000 units at 25% complete. So this is the equivalent units of production. Okay. The next one says, compute the drying department's cost per equivalent unit for pulping and conversion in March. We started with 4,800 pulping, 500 conversion. We added our costs during the period, 102,450 and 31,300 for our total costs. And then here from the previous slide showed our units, equivalent units of production. To figure out the cost, you take the total, divide that by the units of production, 65 cents of pulping and 20 cents for conversion. Next, compute the drying department's cost of ending work in process for pulping conversion and in total for March. So we've got equivalent units, pulping is 8,000, conversions 2,000. We know our cost per equivalent unit. So we can get our cost of ending work in process, 5,600. The units that got transferred out, 157,000 units. So those that got transferred out would be the $133,000 and 450. So this is sitting in ending work in process. This is the cost of what was transferred out. Okay, let's just see the last. Compute the drying department's cost of units transferred out to the finishing department for pulping, conversion, and in total for March. Whoops. Well, that's what we did right there. Ending work in person. And here's our reconciliation report that shows the amount to be accounted for and what's sitting in the work in process and what amounts are being transferred out. So guys, that is it for this chapter. What I think would be helpful is to go through some homework. I'm really struggling with the formulas in Excel. Brandon, if you can hear me, you get Stuart to help. He is so good. So how do you guys feel? Let's just take like a 5-minute break and let's do homework. You game for that? That's how you learn. Okay? Yes, no? Okay. 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 Sorry about that, guys. So we're doing chapter 4. Okay. Okay. Old, are you guys good? Can we start with this one? Old country links. 1 second, guys. Can you just let me have 1 minute? Hey, honey, if you go into Firefox or Safari, if you're in the server, not on your own computer, but you're in the server. Okay. Okay. Okay, text Dina, she'll help you because you can't get, we used to, but we got it, we switched it. I'll call you later, okay? I'm sorry. Time trade, but you can't get into it that way because they do so many people. So you should be able to, there's 3 dots on the right-hand side of the screen and you should be able to bookmark it. Once you find it, you can bookmark it on your own. But Jim can call Jim. He will help you. He's in there. Bye. I'm sorry, guys. Okay. Old Country Links Incorporated produces sausages in 3 production departments: mixing, casing, curing, and packaging. In the mixing department, I got to make this higher. In the mixing department, meats are prepared and ground and then mixed with spices. The spiced meat mixture is then transferred to the casing and curing department, where the mixture is force-fed into casings and then hung and cured in climate-controlled smoking chambers. In the packing department, the cured sausages are sorted, packed, and labeled. The company uses the weighted average method in its processing cost systems. Data for September for the casing and curing department are below. So it tells us at the beginning of the period, the percentages completed, and at the end of the period, the percentages completed. And then it says, and then it gives you the cost too. Work in process September 1st, mixing 1670, materials 90, conversion 605, cost added 81,460, 6,008, 6,006, and 42,490. Mixing cost represents the costs of the spice meat mixture transferred in from the mixing department. The spiced meat mixture is processed in the casing and curing department in batches. Each unit in the above table is a batch, and one batch of spiced meat mixture produces a set amount of sausages that are passed on to the packaging department. In September, 50 units were completed and transferred to the packaging department. So we have all these things we have to do. The first thing is determine the casing and curing department's equivalent units of production for mixing, materials, and conversion for the month of September. Okay? So how are we going to figure that out? This is the equivalent units of production. How many units got transferred to the next department? 50, right? And in the materials with mixing, the mixing was complete by 100%, right? So wouldn't this mixing be 51? What was transferred out? Here, let me do an Excel. Sometimes that's helpful. Let's show it this way. Units transferred to next department. And we've got mixing, materials, and conversion, okay? What got transferred to the next department, we know was 50. It told us that, right? And the equivalent units in ending work in process, wasn't it one unit, and mixing was at 100%, right? And materials were sitting at 80% and conversion was sitting at 70%, right? So we've got the mixing that was done at 100%. The materials were done at 80%, so that's 0.8. The conversion was done at 70%, so that's 0.7. So shouldn't that be our figures here? 51, and this should be 50.8. That makes sense? Kind of? Yes, no? A little bit? Okay, so let's look up here. It told us work in process at the beginning was 1 unit, work in process at the end was 1 unit. It told us that 50 batches were completed and transferred. So what are our equivalent units of production for the month? Wouldn't it be the amount transferred plus our ending work in process? Which is how we're doing it here. The amounts transferred plus our ending work in process 1 unit. The mixing was 100%. This was 80, this was 70. Okay. Next. The next one asks us, compute the casing and curing department's cost per equivalent unit for mixing, materials, and conversion for the month of September. Okay. So how are we going to figure that out? We've got I'm just going to say cost of beginning WIP, work in process WIP, okay? Mixing was 1,670, materials was 90, and conversion was 605. Where did we get that? See, 1670, 90, 605. Here's the cost added during the period, 81,460, 6,006, and 42,490. So then we'll come up with a total cost, okay? So let me add cost during the period. Add costs during period. It's going to be the 81,460, 6,006, and 42,490. Our equivalent units of production is from up here. Right? And then cost per equivalent unit. Wouldn't it be this divided by that? Okay. Does that make sense? I'll keep it up here so you can write it down. How are you guys doing online? 1630, 120, and 850. Okay. Can we move on? How are you guys doing? Next, it asks us, compute the casing and curing department's cost of ending work in process inventory for mixing, materials, and conversion, and in total for September. Okay. So how are we going to figure that out? If we had 1 unit of production for mixing was 1 unit of production, right? Equal this times 1. And what materials was 0.8, right? Conversion was 0.7. Do you agree? This is mixing, materials, conversion. Here's the total. Good, bad. 1630, 96. 595. Okay. Then requirement 4, compute the casing and curing department's cost of units transferred out to the packaging department. Well, we know 50 units got transferred out, right? So 50 units times 1630 is what? $81,500. 50 units times 120, 6,000. Conversion, 50 units at 850, 42,500. What's that make our total, guys? 124, 130. Am I losing you or is it making sense? Is it making sense? Number 5. Cost reconciliation. Beginning of work in process inventory is 1670, or actually 2365, right? Cost added to production is what? Cost added to production, 129,956. I want to make sure. $81,460, 6,006 and 42. So what we have to account for is the 132,321. How do we account for it? Our cost in work in process. Is our 2321 and the costs that were completed and transferred. Is the 130. How you doing? Is it making sense? Okay. Let's try another one. We'll do number 3. Okay, it's a little different. Unless 4 is more difficult. I'm trying to figure out which one. We'll do 3. Okay. Lubricants Incorporated produces a special kind of grease that is widely used by race car drivers. The grease is produced in 2 processing departments, refining and blending. Raw materials are introduced at various points in the refining department. Then it tells us the total incomplete work in process account is available for the refining department for March. So we see what the balance was. We see the materials that went in, the direct labor that went in, and the overhead that went in. We don't know what was completed and transferred to blending or the ending balance. The March 1st work in process inventory in the refining department consists of the following elements: materials, 25,000, direct labor, 4,000, and overhead, 9,000. So it's telling us what's making up that 38,000. Okay. Cost incurred during March in the blending department were materials used, 115, direct labor, 18, and overhead costs applied to production, 42,000. So that's not the refining department, that's the blending department. Prepare journal entries to record the costs incurred in both the refining department and blending department during March. Key your entries to the items A through G below. So the first one is record issuance of raw materials to the refining department and blending. So the refining department materials were $495. The blending department materials were $115, right? See how I'm saying them? So we'll show work in process. In process for the refining department is the $495. Work in process for the blending department is $115. And where does that come from? Raw materials, $610. Yes? I want you guys to attempt to do the next one on your own. Record the direct labor cost incurred in the refining and blending departments. Okay, what do you have there? Okay, what do you guys have for the labor? Work in process refining is what?
8,000.
For the refining department?
4,000.
Well, direct labor, 72,000 is refining, blending is 4,000, right? So work in process for the refining department is 72,000. For the blending department, it's 4,000. No, blending department is 18. Why did I? Blending department, 18 here, I'm sorry, 18. And salaries and wages payable, 90. Okay. Next one, record manufacturing expenses incurred for the whole factory. So manufacturing expenses incurred for the whole factory. 181. $225, it says, credit accounts payable. So we will debit manufacturing overhead. credit accounts payable. Okay. Next, record the entry to apply overhead costs to production at a predetermined rate to the refining department and the blending department. We see in the refining department, it was 181. And in the blending department, it said it was 42,000, right? Refining department, 181. Blending department. And this comes at credit for manufacturing overhead. Right? Record transfer of semi-finished units from refining to the blending department. It tells us the amount of 740 units that were complete with respect to processing in the refining, transferred to the blending of 740, right? So we're going to say work in process, blending is going to be debited 740, and work in process refining 740. It then tells us units that were complete with respect to processing in the blending department that were transferred to finished goods, 950. So we will debit our finished goods, 950. And we'll take work in process, blending department. Then it tells us to record sales on account, 1,500,000. So accounts receivable, 1.5. And we'll show this as sales. Then the last thing we have to do is show the cost of goods sold, which it tells us we would debit our cost of goods sold for 900,000, and we would credit our finished goods. How you guys doing so far? Then it wants us to post all of these transactions that we've just done to the various accounts, but it lets us know there were a couple beginning balances. Post the journal entries to the T accounts. Raw materials had a beginning balance of 618. So we would want to go over here and show our beginning balance of 618. it tells us work in process blending department had a beginning balance of 65. And then it tells us our finished goods had a beginning balance of 20,000. So what they want us to do is go back to each of these journal entries, debit and credit everything. We've got a debit work in process refining, 495. $495. That's number A. We've got blending 115, raw materials 610. Blending 115. See, all I'm doing is just transferring them. I'll do the same with the next one. B, work in process, refining 72, blending 18, salary and wages payable 90. 72, 18, 90. See what I'm, here, let me just make this smaller. Next, manufacturing overhead, accounts payable 225. D, refining 181, blending 42. $233 or 223, I should say. Okay, so you'll just keep going the whole way down. I'm on D, work in process blending 740, refining 7040. So we'll go get rid of the refining 740. Put it in blending 740. Then the last one here, F, finished goods 950, get out of blending department. Okay, and then cost of goods, accounts receivable 15, sales 15. Cost of goods was 900,000. And that comes out of finished goods. Let's see how bad I am here. I'm going to have some X's maybe somewhere, huh? I'm missing something. E 900, 150, 90, 225, 72, 38. Oh, I'm missing something in the refining department. I was supposed to have a beginning balance in that refining department. No? The blending department. Oh, 38,000 was my beginning balance here. See right there, 38,000. That's what I did wrong. So hopefully that makes it correct. Still, it's not complete. What am I? Yep, like over here, I'm missing that letter. Yeah, because you miss one, like this 610 is A here. Okay, where am I missing? Oh, this one too, wages and salaries payable. B. Okay. Anyway, you guys get the gist of how you're going to do this, right? Pretty much. It's complete. Thank you. It's my numbers. So anyway, we've done 2 of them. You have 2 more to do. Very similar to what we're doing here, guys. Okay. As far as your exit, your quiz, you're going to have 10 multiple choice, and here are just examples of what we're kind of dealing with. And you have 2 tries at it all. The assembly department started the month with 24,000 units in its beginning at work in process inventory. An additional 309,000 units were transferred in from the prior department during the month to begin processing in the assembly department. There were 29,000 units in the ending work in process inventory of the assembly department. How many units were transferred to the next processing department during the month? Okay. So it's just asking you, what would you debit when you transfer out from the molding department? Equivalent units. Equivalent units. The cost of equivalent units. The cost of ending work in process. Under the weighted average method, the cost of units transferred out of a department is computed as follows. How do you figure out what gets transferred out? Cost of ending WIP, the cost reconciliation report, and the beginning work in process. Truly, it's going to take you knowing how to do it in order to answer the questions correctly. But it's pretty straightforward. I mean, this is a new concept, but there's just a few of the concepts we're having to pick up this week. Okay? You think you can handle it? How about online, guys? Y'all okay? You guys okay? Is blending, if blending is 18,000, why isn't refining 4,000? I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't even, Tyler, I don't even know.
That was for the
It-
homework on the.
Yeah, it was for number, I think it was number.
Did I screw it up?
No, it was right. It was just the one in the sentences that had like the beginning and the other one that had the ending.
Okay,
So you have to look at like the T account to know that.
got it. Guys, I hope this has been helpful. Again, we're going to meet same place, same time next week here. We'll do it 2 more weeks and then we'll have a week off while you're taking your midterm. How's everyone doing? Well, I'm